OneRoomSports.com. Get that mobile app.
I have Shane P. Hallam with me today to talk a little NFL draft defensive line. Shane, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you really do.
Well, I run drafttv.com. You can go check out that website or find me on Twitter at Shane P. Hallam at DraftTV. I just consider myself an NFL draft analyst. I try to watch all the players in the draft and break them down, scout them essentially, and do my best to just share my thoughts and feelings with people and have those conversations. So I've been putting in work about 6 days a week, just watching players. 2 weeks ago, finished up West Texas A&M and just kind of moving through every school I can.
And Shane, I know we're pretty good friends, and we debate NFL draft throughout the year, not just at this point of the year. This is a year-long process, and we talked a little quarterbacks last week with Ben Albright who really I got a very good perspective on quarterbacks with him. But we're going to talk a little defensive line this week, and we had a little bit of news. He's a defensive lineman in college. I think he'll be moving out to outside linebacker once he gets to the NFL draft, or whatever team decides to pick him up. And Michael Sam deciding to come out and announce that he's gay. This is something big in the world of whatever level of football. It's very huge. Can I get your thoughts on that before we really break down some of these prospects?
Yeah, absolutely. I just talked to him 2 weeks ago down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and I got the impression from him, obviously not knowing this information at the time, but I got the impression from him talking to him about making that conversion to linebacker that he has a very bright head on his shoulders and seems very committed to putting in the work and doing what he needs to do. As you said, this is a big story in the world of sports, and especially in the world of football, where we haven't had an openly gay player in the NFL. And we will now. Michael Sam's going to be in the NFL. For how long, it depends on how he plays. I don't think this actually hurts him that much. I think the story is more just the groundbreaking effect of this, more so than how does this affect him on the field or his draft stock or as a player or in the locker room. I don't think there's going to be as much effect as people say. I don't think there's even going to be as much effect as a lot of the anonymous quotes from the general managers out there. To me, if teams are willing to take a chance on players who have gone to jail and have come back from that, if they're willing to take a chance on players who have gotten arrested in college, and the media scrutiny that kind of surrounds them, then I think teams are going to be fine taking a player that is gay. I really don't think it's going to affect him that much. And he's not a player that was going to be a top 50 pick. I think he's going to struggle to make the top 100 and was going to when he really didn't look very good as a linebacker conversion down in Mobile. That kind of solidified for me. He's probably going to fall a little bit. So I don't think it's going to be because of his sexuality that he does fall. And I think a team could get a steal. I think you can make that conversion. You don't lead the SEC in sacks if you're a bad player. There's something there that can be used and can be utilized in the NFL. So ultimately, I don't think it's going to have much of an effect. I think it's a story that will live on because people want it to live on and want to talk about that and the ground that he broke. But I don't think it affects a team's gonna cut him because he's gay, or a team's not going to draft him because he's gay. I really don't think that's going to happen as much as people think.
And my initial thought with that as well was he's actually in a good position because simply he's able to weed out a lot of the teams that are going to not take a chance on him. The teams like the Browns, the Jaguars, the Raiders, the Jets, any team that really doesn't have a stable infrastructure. He's going to end up with a team possibly like the New England Patriots or the Steelers or the Ravens or someone like that who has a good management side as well as a lot of great leaders on those teams. They're going to know how to handle whether it's the media, whether it's the players inside the locker room. They know how to handle that. So in a sense, he's actually in a better position now than he was before the announcement of him being gay.
And I don't think you rule out any team from taking him because of their infrastructure either. I think there's a lot of teams that could still take that chance and feel like they have the locker room presence for him. Remember, he's a defensive player, so it's not like, oh, well, the teams with the good quarterbacks that have a good locker room and leaders like that. You need those leaders on defense. You mentioned the Cleveland Browns. I think is a team that actually he would fit with that move to the 3-4. They have a leader like Joe Hayden. They have leaders like T.J. Ward if he resigns there. They have leaders on that defense. So I think it is still a place where he can fit in. And ultimately, we got to remember in draft season, this is an intellectual game that these NFL teams are playing. So if I'm a general manager and I've identified Michael Sam as a draftable player, as a player that can fit my team, and I get asked, hey, where's he going to go in the draft? Why am I not going to say that he's going to fall? Or why am I not going to say that he's going to be undrafted? If that makes another team pass on him, then I get to reap those benefits. So I don't always determine those anonymous quotes as being accurate.
Definitely, you cannot really believe anything that any GM, coach, even players on the same team can say during this season, which we love called draft season. And throughout this draft process, there are going to be a lot of big-time players discussed. Let's just get him out of the way. Jadeveon Clowney, he's been the best player at this position for the last 3 years. He's just a physical freak. A couple questions after this year, but I'm not really too concerned about him. For me, he has the size. He's everything you want in a defensive end. He's great with his hands, very good speed. If we all remember the hit against Michigan, but really and truly there's more to him than that, and it was really shown this year in games such as the North Carolina game to start the season. Yes, it didn't on paper. Yeah, you're not going to get 4 sacks a game out of him, but when you see him, even with him being gassed, he's still being double and triple teamed, and he's still being effective. And the fact that offenses are really tailoring their whole offensive scheme around one player says a lot about him.
I think he's phenomenal. I think he's an elite player in this draft. If someone wants to knock him because he doesn't give full effort and it's a character concern, then I don't think they watch enough college football and watch enough defensive ends to identify that there isn't a defensive end in college. There isn't a defensive end in the NFL that doesn't take plays off. It's a position where you're on an island yourself, where even to beat opposing offensive tackles, sometimes it's better to not always give that 100% effort and have a couple plays that are that are expected to be rundowns, that are going to be quick passes, if anything, that you don't want to give 100% effort, because then when you do, you can overpower that offensive tackle. You can play games with them mentally as well. So I think people take this away, and then you add on where he was going to be a top 5 pick going into this year almost no matter what happened. So I don't knock him at all for any of that. And his first step is excellent for a player of his size. He's going to come in the combine and run in the 4.6s and look the part extremely well. So I really think he is a great defensive end prospect. I think he's going to be one of the best defensive ends in the NFL almost instantly. And the comparison for just great defensive ends is tough because there's the all-time greats. There's the Reggie Whites. You can never put anyone on that level before they enter the NFL. But is it going to be Julius Peppers? I think absolutely he can be that type of player, and that's an impactful pass rusher that you're going to take in the top 5 of the draft.
And I really like him mainly because of his, like you said, his get off of with his first step off the line. I've seen him beat tackles, whether it's Taylor Lewan last year, Antonio Richardson this year. Guys in the SEC, he's done it for 3 years, and his game has evolved every year. Most guys, when they're pure pass rushers, their ability to get to the quarterback is a bit stifled because they don't really know how to use their hands. Their footwork isn't all that great. It's not just one thing. If it's taking off a couple plays, I'm okay with that. But when your game hasn't evolved, you haven't got a pass, you haven't got any counter moves, that is when you have a problem with Jadeveon Clowney. I have none. Another guy I really liked, and he showed up big time at the Senior Bowl, is D Ford, a guy that I think is going to end up rising on a lot of boards going towards the end, especially once the combine is over with. I think he's going to be a good player, and I really like what I saw from him.
He's my number 2 defensive end right now. I honestly think his best position might be as an outside linebacker in the 3-4. And late in that first round mix, you have a lot of teams that run hybrid systems or run 3-4 defenses. So I think the end of the first round is a really nice spot for D Ford. A team like the Eagles that really needs to add to their pass rush would be a perfect fit for him. Being at the Senior Bowl, watching him up close and personal, he took Wesley Johnson, the offensive lineman from Vanderbilt, almost drove him right into me. I almost died, thanks to D Ford. So I saw strength along with just the fastest first step that I saw of anyone down there, of any senior pass rusher in this draft, and that's what sells him is the speed. He doesn't have a big variety of pass rush moves. He's not this elite player that can beat you in a number of different ways, but he's so fast off the edge, and I think he's good enough in space that he's going to be able to get to full speed very quickly on offensive tackles. If you have a guy that's heavy-waisted, he's not going to be able to handle D Ford. So I think he's a first-round pick in my eyes, and worst case top 50.
Now, with D Ford, I really saw a lot from him. He opened my eyes a lot against Florida State in the national championship game, in a game where he pretty much had his way with the Florida State offensive line. And really and truly, that was, I think, it wasn't really necessarily his coming out party for most big-time draft picks, but for people that really weren't paying attention to him, yes, it was a big coming out party. And a guy that on the other side for Florida State, who really I've been following for the last couple years, in Timmy Jernigan, who I am just impressed all around with Timmy Jernigan. His way to get up into that middle of that offensive line, take on double teams, get upfield, and still be able to keep his speed and power. A guy that I really like, and the fact that in the national championship he played with the flu and still generated as much production as he did, made a big impact on that game.
I think Jernigan could be the first defensive tackle off the board. I am rated number 3 right now, and he's just a unique player in that he's probably an ideal 3 technique. He's going to provide that penetration in a 4-3 defense. I don't know how he fits in a 3-4 very well. Maybe he can be like Corey Legit and find a way to be a 5 tech. But his leverage and his hand violence are 2 things I love about Timmy Jernigan, is that he uses his legs and his leg power to just utilize a low stance and a good leverage to get under the pads of interior linemen to make penetration for himself. And it's something that's much more difficult than it sounds for an inside defensive tackle. So I've been impressed with that. I think he fits in the cover 2 system where, someone like the Dallas Cowboys, where you can really put him in position to just penetrate and attack the passer, break that pocket on the inside, and I think he can help against the run in that way too.
Now, who are some of the guys? We all know the big name guys, but the not so much known guys, or even the smaller school guys. Who are some of the guys that are interesting to you? Whether it was their performance at the Senior Bowl, whether it was the NFLPA game, the East-West Shrine game, or just throughout the season that really impressed you throughout the year?
I think there's a couple intriguing small school players at the defensive line. They're all going to go third day, or even could be priority free agents of any of these players. But the top small school prospect on the defensive line is Karan Reed from Princeton, who had 2 outstanding seasons. He actually considered coming out as an underclassman, but opted to go back to school. He had already graduated in 4 years from Princeton, so he went back for a 5th year and played. He was at the Senior Bowl, played extremely well, matched up day 1 with these big guys from the SEC, and he was able to hold his own. I talked to him. He's really interesting. His story is very intriguing because both his parents are immigrants. He's from the Bronx. He went to a high school where you didn't get recruited for football, and that's how he ended up at Princeton, by being top of his class in high school and going there to play football. So he's another kind of 3 technique player that maybe can play 5 tech in a 3-4. I think he's really intriguing, probably a 4th to 5th round pick. And then some of the defensive end prospects as well that are small school guys. Ethan Westbrooks from West Texas A&M, who, as I mentioned, I just kind of finished up on him and have him as a late round grade. He's 6'3", 264 pounds, so a little on the bigger side. is definitely a player that gets off the edge very well, uses his power and strength well. I think he's very draftable. And then there's some guys with upside that maybe aren't draftable from the small school ranks, but are pretty close. Larry Webster from Bloomsburg is highly thought of as a defensive end / linebacker prospect, former basketball player that just kind of walked onto the football team and aced the process 2 years ago. 6'6", 250 pounds. May make that transition to outside linebacker into 3-4. He's an intriguing specimen. And then a defensive tackle, there's Zach Kerr from Delaware, who's 330 pounds. He's your nose tackle type of defensive tackle prospect. So you're looking for a late-round defensive tackle. He's someone that's intriguing. And I'll toss one more name out there that got on the combine invite list. Former Arizona State defensive tackle Mike Pennell from Colorado State Pueblo is a huge kind of mammoth of a man, and he runs like he's about 50 pounds lighter than he is. He's very fast off the snap, and he's one of those kind of intriguing, just physical specimens that never did too much on the football field. He was listed at Arizona State at 355 pounds, and then Colorado State Pueblo lists him above 360. So a player like that can move. If he can do that, some team's going to be intrigued in drafting.
And you mentioned Arizona State, and kind of stay there for a minute, and a guy in Will Sutton that really had a chance to come out really high. A lot of folks were high on him last year, not so much this year. Talk about Will Sutton, and we'll stay in the Pac-12 a little bit and talk about Trent Murphy as well from Stanford.
Will Sutton, I just can't get a handle on him. I really can't. He had a great year 2 years ago, and then he comes in this year. He's obviously a little bit bigger. He's not as fluid with that size. I thought, hey, maybe he'll come into the Senior Bowl. He'll be a little lighter. He'll look better. He came in with the same weight, and then he's trying to get to that 300-pound mark, and it's just not working for him. He had one good day at Senior Bowl week and disappeared through the weekend in the game. He's just too big for the body that works for him. You want to compare him to someone like Aaron Donald from Pitt, who I think is a first-round pick and is the top defensive tackle on my board. Aaron Donald's just playing where he's comfortable, and he's dominating. Will Sutton is trying to build weight and look good for the NFL scouts, and it's not working out for him. So he's a player that I think is going to fall to the third round, might be the best-case scenario for Will Sutton. And Trent Murphy is kind of an enigma for me. We've seen sometimes these Stanford players that don't have the great athletic ability on that defense fall a little bit in the draft. I think that could be Trent Murphy. I think he's probably fallen out of the first round. I think he's probably more of a second-round pick. He could come to the combine and repair that stock very quickly, but he just doesn't look like he can put his hand to the ground. He played linebacker at Stanford, and I don't think he's great in pass coverage or great in space. So he's another kind of tweener like Michael Sam is, or I don't find a great position for Trent Murphy. As good of a football player as he is, and the way that he was able to rush the passer was excellent, but we saw him at defensive end in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and it just fell flat for him.
And Murphy, a guy that I've really been paying attention to Stanford a lot the last couple of years. Murphy just, to me, that defense seemed to play more in spite of him than anything. It just, for him, he was impactful certain games, but a lot of times he just disappeared during games. And for me, when you see a guy that he's highly thought of, like him, you want him to make impacts throughout the game, even if it's holding a block or getting to the quarterback, stopping the run. You have to do something well. And he just seems like he's a body out there at certain times throughout a game. Now, you hit the nail on the head, and I want to talk about three more guys before we get out of here. Aaron Donald right now from Pitt is pretty much the top guy. And Aaron Donald, I had a chance to really dig into his game, really going up against my Miami Hurricanes. At the end of the year, it took everything they had to up front. It took three guys in Chantrell Henderson, Shane McDermott, and Brandon Leonard to take care of this guy, and he still made plays. And it really made me think this guy can really be a great player, even though he is a little bit undersized. Sometimes you want that undersized defensive tackle because he can make plays as far as a speed rush instead of being completely power. He's everything you want in a defensive tackle. And for me, I'm not really too worried about him as far as size is concerned, because you can put on a little more, but like you said, he fits in his body. He's not doing too much. He's not doing more than what is needed by these NFL scouts and GMs that want to see you at 300 pounds because that's what they're used to seeing.
Well, I think he has good guidance and a good agent because, like I said, the comparison to Will Sutton put on 20 pounds and looks really sloppy and plays really sloppy. Aaron Donald isn't putting on weight. He came in at the Senior Bowl weigh-in at 6 foot and 7/8, which is good. He was listed at 6 feet tall. Usually players come in under that, so he came in over that. He was above 6 feet. That was a big mark and a big win for him. And then he stayed at 288. So he's staying at that playing weight and really plays well there. Why not just stick with it? The big question is just how is he going to hold up against the run in the NFL? Is he going to be too much of a liability to put out there? And I don't think so. I think he penetrates so well. Remember, this is the player that broke the NCAA record for tackles for loss. That's a run statistic there for the most part for him. So I think he can hold up against the run fine. I think he can actually penetrate and break the run and help his teammates make plays as needed. So I don't exactly know where he's going to go because I don't think he's a great fit for the 3-4. I don't think you can put him at 5 technique and utilize his skills very well. So when you look late in the first round, how many teams, other than maybe the Patriots, really could use Aaron Donald to his efficiency? I don't think there's very many, so there's potential for him to fall to the second round, and if so, he'll end up being a steal. But I think some team's going to pull the trigger on him earlier than people think. Maybe it is a team like Dallas. Maybe it's a team like Tampa that's going back to kind of a cover 2 scheme. Maybe they can move down and take Aaron Donald. I think there's a lot of potential for him, and he's definitely one of my favorites in this draft.
And a guy that I really liked at the Senior Bowl, and he has everything you want as I try to be as impartial as I can, but when you see a guy like a Rashod Bateman from Minnesota, and you don't get to see a lot of Minnesota football all the time, so you get a chance to really dig into him and into his game. He fits into what you see a team like the Patriots do, and when they need defensive linemen, that really helps as well. Rashod Bateman, give us a little bit on him.
He's another tough player to figure out because he was taken off of about 50% of the snaps for Minnesota, sometimes in key situations. There's a lot of plays where he plays a little reckless, very high cut, and things that aren't going to work in the NFL. And then he'll make this kind of wow play with his big size and big strength and power. He's a nose tackle playing in a smaller body, so he can kind of do everything. I mean, I think he's a fringe first rounder at this point. I have him relatively high. He's my number 2 defensive tackle. I have him and Donald and Jernigan lumped pretty well together in my first tier of defensive tackles. And his versatility, I think, is what's going to sell him because he'd be an ideal 5 tech in a 3-4 defense. He could play 3 technique or the 0 tech or even a 1 tech in a 4-3 defense, depending on what type of scheme that you play. So I think his versatility is what's going to get him drafted highly.
And last but not least, and you can't talk defensive line without going to Notre Dame. They have some of the more premier defensive linemen. So let's talk a little bit about Notre Dame's defensive linemen in Stephon Tuitt and Louis Nix III, who they're bigger guys, but they necessarily won't actually play the position that they're listed at.
They're the other 2 difficult prospects. I think defensive line is going to be one of the most fun positions to watch on the first 2 days of the draft because a lot of these players could go in the top 20. A lot of them could fall outside the top 50, and I think both the Notre Dame players fit that mold. I'll start with Louis Nix, the nose tackle, probably the top nose tackle in this draft, 6'3", 340 pounds, had the leg injury, and there might be some remnants of that injury. I think the medical check is big for him. If the medical checks out, he could go number 15 to Pittsburgh. If the medical doesn't check out, he could fall to just to the second or third round. And we saw that happen last year sometimes with these nose tackles and the bigger bodies. Jesse Williams from Alabama is a perfect example of a player. A lot of people are saying, oh, if he could be a first-round pick, give an early second-round pick, he falls down the draft board because of medical. I think Louis Nix fits that category. Great player. Will the medical check out? And then Stephon Tuitt is a good player. He's a nice base defensive end. He's not a great pass rusher, but when he's been healthy, we've seen him do that very effectively, and he looked healthy at the end of the year. So he's my number 3 defensive end right now. I think he's a first-round pick. I think he could go higher than a lot of people think. I think there's a lot of teams that are picking in that top 20 that could use a base D-end like him that has a little pass rush but does hold up against the run. A team like Tampa Bay, a team like Tennessee, I think those teams would covet someone of Stephon Tuitt's abilities. So I like him, and I think he's going to go very high.
Shane, it was great having you on here. Always good to talk NFL draft with you. You're very good with the defensive line. I think that's somewhere a position that really gets you fired up. But it was great having you on. Let the fans know where they can reach you once again before we get you out of here.
No, I appreciate you having me on, Freddie. It's always nice talking to you and catch up a little bit. You can find me over at drafttv.com, see my rankings, my positional rankings, mock draft. It's all up there. Check me out on Twitter at Shane P. Hallam and at drafttv. I'm always happy to answer every question I get on Twitter, so feel free to do that.
All right, Shane, thanks.
Thank you.
Wait, it's the war room with 5 nights at the round table, 5